from the Kickstarter alone, which is breaking records for Monte Cook Games, Old Gods of Appalachia looks to be a new standard for Cypher System fans, with the added rich lore provided by the podcast produced by Deep Nerd Media. This game is sure to join the ranks of Numenera, The Strange, Predation, and more in MCG games that the community just can't resist. But what if you're new to the Cypher System? In this video, I'm going to make the full case for why, based on what we know from the ambitions for this game, the Cypher System is the perfect fit, and we'll do that by taking a look at the game's primer, This Is What You Have Come For, available for free download on the game's Kickstarter page. What separates a TTRPG from improv theater? We could spend hours talking about that alone, but one of the key differences is the assigning of specific challenges with difficulties that place a chance of success or failure, satisfying the parts of us that enjoy a good game to weigh our character's strengths and weaknesses against, while also balancing narrative moments on tosses of fate via the dice. The Cypher System uses a series of 10 levels of difficulty that allow you to gauge how hard something is on a scale of 0 to 10. This scale also packages in the target number to roll for success, which is always 3 times the difficulty number. Memorize counting by threes, and you'll always be able to quickly know what you need to roll, or, if you're the GM, how hard a challenge might be. That difficulty gets adjusted by the strengths and weaknesses of a character, usually training in specific areas otherwise known as skills, the ability for a character to use effort to lower that difficulty, special circumstances or items the players may have, what we often refer to as assets, and of course, unique special abilities the characters may have that can affect the difficulty on a case-by-case basis. This is advantageous for Old Gods of Appalachia and the kinds of games you may play for a number of reasons, but chief among them are an ease of judging and setting a difficulty, an ease of knowing what you need to roll to succeed, and of course, a general sense of liberty and interpretation when it comes to determining how challenging or simple something might be. Let's use an example with a character from the primer. Dutton Tipper Carter, he/him, is a mysterious miner who dug too deep. We'll get into the advantages of this form of character construction via sentence in a moment, but let's look at his skills: mining, knowing the unknowable, and blockading. Let's imagine a game scenario where the party is deep underground, perhaps in an abandoned mine. They're lost in the cavernous depths and are searching for a way out as something haunting is possibly stalking them around every corner. Maybe a character is wounded and the stakes are high for finding a way out. The GM sets the difficulty in finding a way out or forward at a level 5, requiring a 15 on the die. We don't add numbers to the die roll in the Cypher System, so hitting a straight 15 is pretty tough. There's a good chance of failure. For our mysterious miner, however, his training in mining might aid him at a status of trained if the GM accepts that Dutton's training in mining gives him insight into the typical layout of a mine. That's going to drop the difficulty from a level 5 to a level 4, requiring a 12 on the die. Again, this will be up to interpretation, and the GM might ask for a bit of backstory and rationale for how this skill relates. And if the skill doesn't directly relate, there are ways that the player can spend XP to improve their odds. More on that later. Hitting a 12 on the die is still a bit of a challenge, but with the supernatural creature howling deep in the hollows of the mine, Dutton won't be leaving much up to chance, so he'll invest 4 levels of effort, reducing his intellect pool by a substantial amount to bring the difficulty to a 0, guaranteeing success and a way out of the mine. It takes a serious toll on Tipper, dropping his intellect pool by 9 points, but the story now becomes about how having this character in the party, with their experience in mining and the intense last-minute effort they threw in to find a way out, saved the day. But let's say the GM rules that training in mining applies more directly to the physical act of mining and less about knowing the average layout of such a space. Our difficulty would be a level 1 after applying effort, requiring a 3 and leaving a small but still very serious chance of failure. Let's assume that Tipper doesn't have enough levels of effort to apply to reduce this to 0. All hope isn't lost, because Tipper also has a Witch Bottle Cypher. This is a one-time use powerful item, a jar fixed with a mixture of herbs and oils and bones that was discovered out in the mysterious deep of the woods. This particular witch bottle could be an alarm, allowing the party to gain an advantage on initiative should they come face to face with the supernatural threat. It could also aid the party, as it might grant them a free recovery roll to restore pool points. It might also trap said supernatural being, dramatically changing the story by granting the player with some kind of eldritch horror contained in this very item. Maybe they'll take it with them, maybe they'll leave it in the mine. These options are all possible because Cyphers interface with the game not merely by reducing difficulty, although some might, but by quickly changing the circumstances in such a way that the story moves on and doesn't just become rounds of chucking attack rolls at target numbers. Whether we're talking about training and skills that are more broad and about areas of experience and knowledge and less about numerical bonuses, or key items that can suddenly change the situation, in each of these scenarios we're engaging with the difficulty with a more narrative lens. It's about who the characters are and the nature and magic of the world than it is about the specific granular mechanics. The 10 levels of difficulty are a quick way of determining a target number, and it allows us to quickly know what needs to be rolled, and it leaves that moment of rolling the die, which is free of stacking numbers, to be more present and central. That's when things get thrown to the winds of fate. While we've yet to know all of the character options and new types that will be unique to Old Gods of Appalachia, the game's primer gives us a bit of a sneak preview. Character construction in the Cypher System is a 3-part sentence of a descriptor, a type, and a focus. Taking a look at the character of Linda K. Wheeler, her descriptor is creative, her type is a healer, and her focus is spins yarn. Each of these units will be the source of Linda's strengths and weaknesses, but it also tells a story on its own. Compare her to Zebulun Bowen, who is a charming preacher who shepherds the community. From just these sentences alone, we can see that the Cypher System will afford Old Gods of Appalachia a game that focuses on who your character is in this world. And with focuses like spins yarn or shepherds the community or dug too deep, we learn a bit more about who these characters are and who they might be when situations get dire from these sentences alone. It's less about their mechanical builds and more about who they are in this world and in the narrative the party constructs at the table. This gets us away from granular mechanical min-maxing points of view and understanding a character's role in the space of the game. And for a horror game dealing with narrative concepts instead of mathematical ones, and in a setting where we might enter the interiority of a character to deepen the relationship to the mystical, unknowable depths of horror and magic, having such a narrative, language-driven perspective helps us thinking more along the lines of storytelling and plot, and less about mechanics and builds. This helps us sustain the rhetoric and thematic power of this remarkable setting. We're thinking about who your character is in the midst of the deep woods, not what your character is on the page. The Cypher System also doesn't use hit points. It instead uses 3 stat pools: abstractions of your character's physical build through might, their dexterity and quickness through speed, and their mental reactions and personality affects through intellect. Activating powers, applying effort to make something easier, and taking damage all tax these ability pools. What this means is that your characters are vulnerable to more than just attack rolls that lower hit points. It means that challenges aren't just about fighting monsters, but instead could be in the might task required to force open a stuck door in a cabin in the woods, the intellect task it might take to outthink a haunting presence looking to trap the party in the thick of the forest, or simply the exhaustion that comes from running for your life through endless wilderness. Characters here are more than just mechanical pawns with pluses and minuses, but are instead narrative concepts abstracted through a series of risk-reward mechanisms with a narrative sheen that casts them as players with both a life and history to lose and a system that tracks their capacity in ways that are more than just about suffering damage. One of the key elements in understanding the Cypher System from my personal perspective is to see challenges as narrative frameworks and concepts. The entry for the Ghost Hitchhiker in the primer is a perfect example. The Cypher System deals less with monsters and NPCs in terms of stat blocks and more as a narrative challenge. We know from the Hitchhiker having a level of 4 that interactions with them might have a chance of success or failure and will require a roll of 12. This includes everything from outrunning the creature to attacking the creature, and we know from the modifications that this being has a slight advantage in tasks relating to persuasion and interaction, which here raises the difficulty to a 5, requiring a 15 for these circumstances. The information is here, of course, if you want to run this as a standard monster in an RPG as we usually understand it. Health, health, damage, and other behavioral affects are listed for when you need them, but the layout of the creature in the Cypher system requires you to think less in terms of a challenge rating or combat scenario, and more as a narrative experience. You'll want to see this entry as a narrative experience of encountering a ghostly hitchhiker on the road and roleplay from there. The basic information of its levels and modifications gives us what we need if someone wants to attempt something challenging or risky, and the simple construction also allows us to tailor this creature or narrative challenge to our own desires. Let's imagine a narrative scenario where a party encounters a ghostly apparition on the road. Very appropriate for this setting. The stats quickly tell us how hard this will be for the party without needing to dive into a variety of hyper-specific granular elements. Instead, we can focus on the haunting experience and how we might describe it. The stats are just there for when we need them to determine success or failure. But what if we wanted to tailor this to a bit more of a specific scenario? Let's turn back to our character examples and say this ghost is actually the spirit of Linda Kay's aunt who was murdered unbeknownst to Linda by Dutton Carter's late father. The ghost wants to get her revenge by hoping to encourage Linda to turn on Dutton. She wants this to be an experience similar to how she was murdered, perhaps by Dutton's father who was a friend of hers and thus she never saw the betrayal coming. The ghostly hitchhiker persuades at a level 5, so she's already got a good chance of planting those seeds of doubt and distrust in Linda. But if we wanted to raise the stakes, we could simply say that tasks relating to this non-player character's death function at a level 7, requiring the impossible number of a 21 on the die. This means that Linda's player has to either invest a level of effort to resist being persuaded in any way, or must have training or an ability that will help her out to even succeed. Otherwise, this desire for revenge that has outpaced the silence of the grave will sow doubt, distrust, and even disaster for the party. The ease of the Cypher system in moving difficulty around like this and adding unique circumstances without much math or balancing means that you can think a bit more directly and freely. Amping up the difficulty based on a narrative beat, such as our ghostly hitchhiker having a distant connection to a player character, can be achieved in the moment as the GM feels inspired or during an intense prep session by simply moving the difficulty level around, and it establishes cohesion between narrative concepts and challenging game encounters. And this is why GMs don't roll dice in the Cypher system, because we're instead moving narrative frameworks around in these ways that more directly challenge the players through a narrative lens. But okay, if you really want to roll dice as a GM in the Cypher system, there will undoubtedly be a giant list of ciphers on a percentage chart in the book, each with a d6 roll for difficulty, and if you want, the GM can roll for depletion rates on artifacts. That still affords the GM a touch of randomness that will have some pretty dramatic changes to the game. For my own tastes, I tend to do those rolls during my own prep sessions for a Cypher system game, but you can introduce that in the moment if you really want. One of the unique elements of the Cypher system is in how it handles experience points. Players earn these through narrative-based progressions as opposed to defeating monsters. XP can of course be used to further develop a character mechanically, but there are a number of benefits a character can purchase that focus more on developing their connection to the world and story, such as learning very specific skills, or something more tied into the narrative history, such as establishing key relationships to NPCs, specific locations, and more. Players may also burn XP to trigger a player intrusion, a moment where the player takes control of the narrative and gets a chance to, within certain constraints and under GM approval of course, have a greater say over how the narrative develops. Another key method of earning XP is through GM intrusions, moments where the GM raises the stakes and complicates or further progresses the narrative in an unexpected way. This is a powerful narrative tool the GM can use to create suspense, which in a horror game will help hang the fear of the unknown and unexpected over the table. XP ebbs and flows in the Cypher system as a set of meta-narrative tools that give both GM and players the ability to progress either their characters or the narrative in unique ways that may not be outlined in the book or defined under a specific power or advancement. It provides a gentle framework that helps put some restrictions and guides on creative brainstorming to be sure that there's some balance and a risk-reward element always at play in the game. Old Gods of Appalachia is going to be much like Numenera or The Strange in that it won't require a copy of the Big Red Cypher System book. And based on some of the abilities mentioned in the primer, there'll likely be some overlap of abilities and possibly even ciphers across these books. It's fantastic that Old Gods of Appalachia will be a complete standalone experience, a single book on the table to build from and reference. However, the set of tools and compatibility of other Cypher System products means that there's a wide range of things to toss into your games. systems, with little concern for compatibility and balance issues. While we've yet to know the full extent of what rules of the Cypher System will appear in this book, I can already start thinking of the possibility of using the horror system from the CSR if it's not in this book, or combining something like the recently released First Responders. And if you really want to genre bend this and tweak elements to your flavor a bit more, tossing in something like Godforsaken might give you some really interesting magic items and a well laid out crafting system. But all of this is speculation until we know the full contents of this book, and I fully expect this tome to provide us with everything we need, but having that connective tissue with other products is only a plus. If you're familiar with the Cypher System, then you likely knew everything I was going to say anyway, but if you're new to this rule system, I can assure you that this really is the perfect balance of game mechanics and narrative priority that will make this setting and premise excel at creating memorable and engaging moments at the table or on the screen. This channel will be covering much more about the Old Gods of Appalachia RPG as we near its release, alongside the science fantasy content this channel focuses on. Be sure to check out the Kickstarter page to learn more about this stunning upcoming product from MCG and Deep Nerd Media, and contribute to making this game even better by backing it if you can. Until next time, be sure to subscribe to The Infinite Construct for more Cypher System and beyond gaming content.